let's make breakfast from the garden. In today's episode, we're going to be making a garden-to-table breakfast with a delicious scallion pancake breakfast sandwich situation, freshly squeezed citrus juice. Then we're going to get our hands dirty in the garden. We're going to start some of our spring and summer crops. I'm going to show you my fail-proof method to doing so. Then we're going to do a potted herb garden tutorial for beginning gardeners or wherever you may be on your gardening journey. And then finally, we're gonna wrap with a mid-winter garden tour. I'm gonna show you everything I have growing in my garden with lots of helpful tips along the way. All right, for some breakfast for the chickens, I'm gonna get some of these cauliflower and broccoli greens that are a little bit spent from some pests that I've been dealing with, but they make for really good chicken treats. So let's give the ladies some treats and then we'll see if they have some eggs. Bon appetit! They really love the greens. Let's see if the ladies got anything for me this morning. So we got 4 eggs. This will be perfect for breakfast. Thank you, ladies. Next, we're gonna get some Swiss chard. So this is Swiss chard here. Swiss chard is related to beets, and the Swiss chard is kind of like the greens of the beet, and then a beet is the root of a Swiss chard. I've got a couple of Swiss chard plants scattered throughout the garden. They're super compact, pretty beginner friendly. I don't have a lot of issues with pests when it comes to growing Swiss chard, and they make for a really good, nutritious breakfast. Next, I'm gonna grab some green onions. So this is a variety called walking onions. So they are perennial, and what they do is you only have to plant them once, and they sprout out green, then they go to flower, then they create a bulb, like almost like a small onion bulb, and then the bulb gets super heavy, drops back down into the soil, and replants green onions for the next season. So right now we're in midwinter, approaching spring, so we're really only seeing them as green onions right now. I highly recommend seeking out walking green onions if you can find them. They're super easy. You kind of plant them and forget about them, and then when you need green onions, you've got them at your fingertips. And I'm just kind of picking off the spent portions and just kind of putting them back in the raised bed, and they'll decompose. All right, there's nothing better than freshly squeezed orange juice, and we're approaching the end of citrus season here. Well, not the end, but we're getting close to the end. And as you can see, I've harvested all of the outer oranges of this orange tree, and what I've got left are all the ones that are a little bit harder to get. So we're gonna grab a couple of oranges and try and be a little bit careful because these branches are kind of all in different directions, but sometimes you gotta get your hands dirty when it comes to harvesting, okay? And these are Valencia oranges. All right, we're in the middle of Los Angeles. Perfect. All right, I am a recent convert to breakfast. I used to like breakfast. At the beginning of 2024, I made a New Year's resolution to try and eat a little bit more breakfast, protein throughout the day. And I started off slow, and now breakfast has come to be my favorite meal of the day. So we're gonna make a little fun breakfast this morning. We're gonna be making kind of like a scallion pancake breakfast sandwich. This is inspired by a restaurant that I went to in Brooklyn where they had these scallion pancake breakfast sandwiches that were really delicious. It's super easy, so let's get started. To recap what we got from the garden, we've got some really nice colorful Swiss chard, red, yellow, green, white, some of those green onions or scallions, whatever you want to call them. We've also got Valencia oranges. We're gonna do some freshly squeezed orange juice, some eggs from the ladies. And then from our last video, I don't know if you remember, but we harvested a pomelo. We're gonna cut this open, see what it looks like, maybe juice it with the oranges. And then also the Haas avocados that we harvested last time are perfectly ripe and will be really, really tasty on our breakfast sandwich. All right, to this flour, I'm gonna add a little bit of salt. And then I've also got some warm water, and I'm gonna slowly add this to the flour until a nice dough starts to form. So this is 1 cup of flour, and we're gonna probably go with about 6 tablespoons total of water, but depending on the flour that you're using, it might require a little bit more, a little bit less, so that's why I'm going kind of slow here. Just about perfect. We're gonna need this for 5 minutes, and I'm gonna set a timer. Add a little bit more. So it's a little bit too hydrated, so I'm gonna add a little bit more flour to this bowl as we need. There we go. And so the process of kneading helps build a little bit of the gluten in our very simple dough. This is incredibly easy. And while this dough rests after we knead it, I'm gonna make all of the other sort of additions to our breakfast sandwich. So there won't be any downtime with this. So like I said, I was not always a breakfast person. I was probably since I was 14 or 15 would drink an extra large cup of black coffee and then would not have an appetite until at least lunch. So at the beginning of 2024, I was like, okay, this is probably not healthy and maybe I should start eating breakfast or having something alongside the coffee or before it. And what better way to do that than like drawing inspiration from the garden? We've got eggs from the chicken. So I always try to like challenge myself with new breakfast recipes. And this is one of those recipes. And this measurement is gonna make 1 scallion breakfast sandwich pancake. So if you wanna make more, or if you wanna batch these out, it's basically 1 cup per serving of scallion pancake. That was 5 minutes. We're gonna cover this up and get ready with the rest of our ingredients. And we'll be back with this. So for our breakfast sandwiches, we're obviously gonna do eggs, but I'm also gonna do some bacon. So get this bacon cooked up. Who doesn't love bacon? All right, while our bacon cooks up, I'm going to juice our citrus, but first I wanna show you how gorgeous this pomelo looks like on the inside. Again, this is a Valentine pomelo. So I'm gonna cut it this way. Look how beautiful that is. Smells really good too. Okay, so I think we should juice maybe a quarter of this. I'm gonna scrape some of these seeds out just to make it a little bit easier for us. And I just got my simple juicer here, but I I think I want to upgrade my juicer to one of those like electric juicers, especially with all this citrus that we grow. But look at this color. This is also one of the reasons why it's called the Valentine Pomelo, is because look how pink that juice is. I was not expecting it to be this beautiful. I'm gonna pour this carefully into my cup. Perfect. And then our Valencia oranges. Smells really good. Between the bacon and the citrus, things are starting to smell really good in here. All right, this is gonna be about a perfect cup with the 4 oranges and 1/4 of the pomelo. All right, I'm gonna set this aside until we're ready for breakfast. All right, our bacon is done. I know people have opinions about how their bacon's cooked. I prefer almost crispy bacon. I wouldn't say like super crispy bacon, but I prefer crispy bacon. All right, set this aside until we're ready for our sandwich. So a few of my other favorite garden breakfasts that I've made include quiche, which once spring starts, I really get into quiche because the eggs are even more abundant. So the term spring chicken is true. So spring chickens are very active. They lay a lot of eggs. And then with quiches, there's even more greens in the garden for us to make delicious quiches out of. But for now, we just have mostly Swiss chard and kale in the garden. So I've been making a lot of scrambles in the wintertime. And we're just cooking this Swiss chard in that residual bacon grease. I like to reserve my eggshells and then crush them up and then give them back to my chickens. So chickens need calcium in order to create a really nice, firm eggshell. So I like to crush those up and then give them back to my chickens, and they really enjoy them. So I'm gonna do 2 eggs for me, a little bit of salt, a little bit of pepper, and then a splash of whole milk. Some other breakfasts I like are breakfast burritos, breakfast hash. So whether I have sweet potatoes or regular potatoes or new potatoes, that makes a really fabulous breakfast as well. I get a lot of questions about cooking with cast iron. So a couple of my tips for cooking with cast iron is that you need to make sure that it's properly heated up if you're going to try and cook something in it that you need it like a non-stick. So for example, with eggs, you really want to make sure that the pan is well heated and well oiled before adding in something like eggs. And then in terms of taking care of your cast iron, some tips that I have are you can wash it. I think that it's fine to wash with a little bit of soapy water and a sponge. But the key is that you want to make sure that you really well dry out your cast iron before putting it away. Don't let it just air dry on your countertop or whatever, but you really want to, as soon as you finish washing it, you want to dry it fully out with a dishcloth. Okay, so our Swiss chard is nicely wilted, super colorful, and I'm just gonna add in my eggs. This is just gonna be a super simple scramble, nothing fancy. You can see the eggs pretty much aren't sticking to the cast iron, but it'll clean out really easily. All right, eggs are done. Okay, now it's scallion pancake time. So I'm gonna slice up some of these scallions or green onions, whatever you wanna call them. I'm gonna get mostly the green bits here. And that should be about enough for one pancake. Set those aside, and then our dough is nicely rested after we kneaded it. Put out a little bit of flour onto my cutting board here. We're gonna roll this out to a pretty big circle. And from kneading it and then letting it rest, the dough is really nice and soft and pretty easy to roll out. Okay. All right, the next thing we're gonna do is we're just gonna drizzle a little bit of oil on top of here. And then we're not making a pizza, but it kind of looks like that. Add in our green onions or scallions. And then we're just gonna roll this up really tightly into a little log. And then into another circle, kind of like a little snail almost here. And this is what's gonna give us some of those nice flaky layers. Okay, and then we're gonna get to rolling until we get to a really nice, thin enough pancake, or kind of flatbread more so than a pancake. And I'm kind of just continuously flipping and making sure that my dough doesn't stick to the cutting board, which it's not. And since this will puff up a little bit when we go to fry it, we want this to be really nice and thin, because even though this looks pretty thin so far, it'll get quite a bit bigger than this. Starting to stick in some places, so I'm just gonna add a little bit of flour. Almost there, just gonna try to make it a little bit more even. Don't want it to be too big because then it won't fit into the skillet. All right, I've been preheating my cast iron skillet here, and I'm just gonna put a nice layer of oil in here to heat up. And I'm using a neutral oil. I'm using avocado oil, which is good on medium to high heat. Perfect. Put this into the skillet as quickly as I can. And this is gonna fry on both sides for about 3 to 4 minutes on medium heat. Haas avocado from last time's harvest, and let's cut it open. There are a lot of things that I grow in my garden that I'm really proud of, but I think this might be one of the things that I'm most proud of. I'm just gonna take a peek, but it really does need like 4 minutes on each side. Try to lift it up to show you. All right, I'm gonna flip this. Looks pretty good. We're gonna go another 3 to 4 minutes on the other side. And while it's golden on the outside, we really just wanna make sure it cooks all the way through. We don't want any sort of raw dough. But other than that, this is really easy. All right, our pancake bread is ready. It's nice and bubbly, crispy. I think we're ready to eat. I am so hungry. This looks amazing. Okay, so we're gonna assemble this. Pretty simple here. I'm gonna put eggs. Oops. Bacon. Or whatever protein you want. Okay. And then some of the delicious avocado. Someone recently asked me if homegrown avocados taste better, and I think there's a little bit of a placebo effect because I grew them, but for some reason the avocado tastes a little bit more like an avocado than a regular avocado. I don't know if that makes sense. The flavor is more strong or robust. And then my favorite hot sauce, this is the habanero hot sauce from Yellowbird. It's nice and spicy, but also like really nice and tangy. Not sponsored. And there you have it, our scallion breakfast sandwich. All right, we've got our morning fuel ahead of a day of gardening. Let's do a little taste test. All right. Okay. That is so good, obviously, and worth the work. I know sometimes people say that's a lot of effort for breakfast. We just want to get on with our day, but if you're not convinced about breakfast, try the sandwich and then get back to me. Cheers. All right, we've got the most exciting time of the year. It's time to start seeds. I prefer to start as much as I can from seeds for a couple of reasons. So first off, it's cost effective. So each of these seed packets are under $3 each, and they usually come with about 2 dozen seeds. That usually yields about, half to a little bit more than half that amount of those plants. So for $3, you could get about 15 jalapenos, 15 eggplants, 15 tomato plants. That's pretty good. But also the other reason is I think that you get a better variety when you start from seeds. So you can pick out really cool, fun, sort of new things to you, or if you're looking for specific flavors or things that are situated for your climate, it's a little bit better to start from seed. Lastly, I think that you learn so much by starting from seed. But that being said is I always like to go to the nursery and see what they have too. So when it comes to starting seeds, I've got opinions. Most of the time I say like, you do you, but through trial and error over the past decade, I've honed in on my process, and this is how I do it. I will share with you as we go along some of my hot takes when it comes to seed starting. First off, you can always buy seed starter mix already. They're usually in kind of like the seed aisle of your big box store. I prefer to start my seed starting mix myself. I think it's way more cost effective and you only need a few ingredients. It's kind of like a recipe. So we're doing equal parts coconut coir, compost, and then perlite. You could, if you don't have perlite, you could use pumice or sand as well. So they all kind of function for different purposes. So coconut coir is gonna be your main filler, and that also helps with the aeration of your seed starter mix. Perlite or pumice or sand also helps with water retention and also with that like nice kind of loose texture. And then compost, for obvious reasons, is for the nutrients. So you want your seedlings to have that really, really nice start to their life. When they first germinate, you want them to be packed with nutrients. It gives them the best chance of survival. So this might not look like much, but we're gonna put this into my handy dandy bucket. So we put the coconut coir into the bucket, and now we're gonna fill this up with water, and this is gonna expand like crazy. And then we're gonna continue with our recipe here, and I'm gonna add in the perlite and compost. So perlite, you could also use pumice or sand. And then we mix. And the goal is to break up that coconut coir. Yeah, we're looking for that like kind of loose soil texture, and as this coconut coir breaks down, it's gonna sop up all of this water. So it might take a second or two. I'm gonna set this aside until the coconut coir soaks up all of the water that's in there. And in the meantime, this is one of my strong opinions, is I really don't like the containers for trays that have the containers already in them. I don't know if that makes sense, but I don't want to have to pop out the seedling from the tray. Instead, I like to start them in individual little containers like this. This is the perfect size because you don't really need to pot these up. So with the trays that have like little spaces, you then end up having to like pot them up into bigger pots. For me, I just want them to stay in one tray while they're maturing and getting ready to go in the garden. We want to get our labels ready. So no matter how much you think you're going to remember what you started, make sure you label. So we've got 3 fun seeds that we're going to start today. We've got jalapeno, which is an early jalapeno variety. We've got a black beauty eggplant, and then a Cherokee purple tomato. All 3 of these crops benefit from a nice head start on the growing season. And then once the temperatures get well above 65 degrees consistently, we're gonna transfer these out into the garden. So I'll show you kind of what my indoor seed starting setup is like after I get these planted. But first, let's make labels for each of these. So I always do the variety, what it is, and then the date that I'm starting it or sowing the seed. This will let you be able to see if maybe you're having germination problems. So most seeds should germinate within 7 to 14 days of when you plant them. So let's do today's date. The reason why I do label them is because there are times when I haven't labeled them, and no matter how good I think my memory is, it's not that good. And I always end up mixing things up. I can usually tell what plant things are based on what they end up looking like, but for specific varieties, it's kind of nice to be able to know what exactly you're planting. You could also do this with a permanent marker. You don't necessarily need to use a fancy label maker. I just like the ease of it. And my handwriting is not so good. Once the seed starting season begins, I am starting seeds just about every weekend. So I'll do about 2 trays every weekend for my size of garden, but it just totally depends on kind of what your time frame is like and what sort of space you have indoors to accommodate a couple trays of seedlings. I like to batch them out because of a process called succession planting. So succession planting is when you don't necessarily plant all of your plants at once, so you kind of batch out when you plant your tomatoes. So maybe I'll plant my first round of tomatoes that I started today in the beginning of March, and then I start another batch at the beginning of April, and then another batch gets planted at the beginning of May. And that way you kind of get to harvest tomatoes throughout the season. Things ripen at different times, and it's just a really good way to prolong the season of whatever crop you want to start. It also gives you a pretty big window to start your garden. So even though I'm starting this the last week of December, this process works no matter what time of year you're in. So maybe you don't have exactly enough space in your garden quite yet to plant out all your tomatoes. Maybe you're still harvesting your cabbages. Getting a head start indoors allows you, once that space frees up in your garden, then you can just pop in those tomatoes. Okay, we are just about there on the texture. And the reason why I make my own seed starting mix is that a bag of seed starter mix that would be about this much, or even less, might be about $15 to $20, whereas this is a lot less than that. A coconut core pack is like $2, and then I only used a little bit of the compost bag, and then I already had perlite from last season. It's okay if they're a little bit messy. Once the dirt dries off, we can just kind of brush that off. All right, so that seed starting mix yielded about, let's see, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 18 seed pots. And like I said, these are gonna stay in these until they're ready to go in the ground. And we've got a little bit left over, but I can just kind of throw this in the garden or start a couple more seeds. And so I'm gonna start 6 of each of the eggplant, jalapeno, and tomato. So let's start with jalapeno, then we'll do Cherokee tomato, and then the Black Beauty eggplant. All 3 of these go at about the same seed depth, and then they also take about the same time to emerge. So they're all at a 1/4 inch spacing. The reason why I picked these 3 is that they all benefit from an extra boost of warmth inside, especially eggplant and peppers. These are heat-loving vegetables. They want it nice and warm. Peppers thrive at 70 degrees and above, sometimes even 80 degrees and above. Same thing with eggplant. Before I moved to the garden that I'm currently in, I was in a little bit of a cooler community, like more coastal in Los Angeles, and I didn't have as good of success growing eggplant. But now that I'm a little bit more inland, it's a little bit more warmer during the summer, my eggplants have done a lot better. So if you're struggling with eggplants or peppers, it might just not be hot enough where you're living, so you might want to create like a greenhouse sort of environment for them. So we're just gonna go at a 1/4 inch each depth, and we're gonna do 2 seeds per each. And the goal is for both of them to germinate, and then we'll thin it out to 1 plant per each pot. But the reason why we do 2 is just in case one doesn't germinate, then you've got another one kind of already in there. So we've got jalapeno seeds. So we're gonna go 1/4 inch each. Just use my finger. All right, so they're all at a 1/4 inch here, so we're just gonna cover them up. And since the soil's already really wet here, I'm not gonna water these, but if your soil seed mixture is a little dry, I recommend using a spray bottle. I would not use a watering can or a hose, but a spray bottle to get the surface of each little place where you planted your seeds nice and moist. Seeds need constant moisture in order to germinate. So we've got all our seeds tucked in, snug as a bug. And then next up, we've got a humidity dome. So this will ensure that the heat and moisture of our seedlings stays nice and trapped inside of here. And it kind of creates a little greenhouse where the water will evaporate to the top of the lid, and then it goes to the top, and then it ends up raining back down on your seedlings. We're gonna transfer these inside, and they're gonna be set up on a heat mat. So the heat mat helps aid in making it a nice warm environment for those seeds to emerge. And we'll get this set up. Got the heat mat, and we're gonna put these in a sunny windowsill so they get some extra heat, and then once the seedlings emerge, then they'll get some nice sun. And then we can always supplement with some artificial light once the seedlings emerge. I believe that every great garden starts with herbs. Whether you're a beginning gardener, first getting your feet wet, or an expert gardener, most people can agree that herbs are one of the best things to grow. They're easy, they're super rewarding, and you can harvest them continuously throughout the season. So today I'm gonna show you how I pot up some herbs. I like to keep my herbs on my back porch in a little sunny spot. It's really easy to grow herbs in pots. So if you're short on space or you want to be able to move things around, I really like this size of pot to grow herbs in. And there are some herbs that you must grow in a pot or else they'll take over your whole garden. So I picked out from my local nursery some of my favorite herbs to grow in pots, and I'll kind of walk you through each one of them. You've got annuals and perennials. So an annual only lives for one season or 1 year. So this is dill. Super flavorful, really great in sauces with fish, or also a great pickling spice. But if you contrast that with something like rosemary, rosemary is a perennial. So it'll come back year after year. It will go through hills and valleys of being a little bit more abundant at certain times than others. Mint's another amazing perennial. This is one of those herbs that you must grow in a pot or else it will take over your entire garden. Another great herb, chives. So these also can be grown as perennials, and they also produce some really beautiful edible purple flowers that you can use in salads or use in things like vinegars. You can infuse vinegars with the purple flowers from chives, but also they're just really great to have on hand. Another one that I recommend growing in a pot, especially for beginning gardeners, is oregano. It has a very similar growth pattern to mint. It's also a perennial, but it grows kind of like a mat. So it sends shoots under the soil, pushes it out, and then it comes back up a few inches away. And that makes it really hard to get rid of. Another annual that I always love to have in the garden is parsley. I feel like you can never have too much parsley on hand. Really good, also for sauces, also pastas, really great with fish. One of the things that we use parsley a lot for in our house are like linguine with clam sauce, putting like almost a cup of chopped parsley in there. Chamomile is an annual, but it'll self-seed. So chamomile produces these really gorgeous yellow little flowers that are really good in teas or baked goods. And they have a tendency to self-seed in place. So you could grow it in this pot. The yellow flowers will start to set seed into the pot below, and then you'll have new growth. And I want to make sure that everybody knows that it's an annual, is cilantro, just because it grows so fast and it is extremely sensitive to heat. So it does well in the early summer in partial shade, or in winter, early spring in full sun here in a warmer climate. We're gonna first plant this mint. It's pretty simple to plant. And so I've got my pot and a little bit of potting soil. So first thing I'm gonna do is just fill it up a little bit with some potting soil. And then I'm gonna take my mint out. And then what I like to do is kind of break up the roots, but not be too aggressive with it. And put that in there. And you kind of want the neck of it to be in line with the top of the pot. And then you're gonna backfill with potting soil. So you wanna make sure you're using a high quality potting soil for this. This is Booze Blend potting soil that I'm using. And some tips for prolonging the season and making sure your herbs last as long as possible is you actually wanna harvest from them pretty regularly. So something like mint, when you cut from it or harvest from it regularly, it actually helps to encourage some more growth. It's okay if you make a little bit of a mess doing this. That's kind of what gardening's all about. So I always like to kind of go from the outside in. So if you wanted some of this mint, don't go all the way down to the bottom, just kind of snip the top. That's a little bit of mint, and then snip here. You just kind of want to just grab a few leaves. And that would be the perfect amount for a nice cup of fresh mint tea. And then we're just gonna water this. Looks like there's a hole in my bucket or my watering can. Oh well, okay. So when it comes to watering your herbs, you wanna check them every other day to make sure that they are sufficiently watered. And the way that you do that is just putting one finger in about an inch. If the soil is moist, you're good. And there you have it. That's how you plant mint. Welcome to my garden. This is where I try to grow as much of my own food as I possibly can right here in the middle of Los Angeles. I'm gonna be doing a really in-depth garden tour. We're in the middle of winter, and I'm gonna show you what it looks like right now. Although there's not a lot going on here, it's kind of nice to see how things transition over the years, season by season. And I think we could check in each season and kind of see how things have evolved. Starting off with, I think that's just the overall structure of the garden. I have 10 raised beds. Each raised bed measures by 4 feet by 10 feet, and they're each 2 feet tall. And then in between each raised bed, I have a gravel pathway that's about 2 feet wide, filling up each raised bed about 50 to 60% of the way with compostable matter before adding potting soil and compost and mulch. So this raised bed has nothing in it. I think I'm gonna plant some peas, but this is where my cucamelons were. I'll show you some of the cucamelons that had dropped. So cucamelons are mini cucumbers that look like watermelons. These are pretty old. I'm letting them decompose in the raised bed, but I think I'm gonna do a quick crop of maybe peas in this raised bed or some sort of legumes just to help with the nitrogen in the soil. The last episode here, we planted beets in this raised bed. There are dark red sprouts popping up all on this side of the raised bed, which is good. Our beets have germinated. I'm probably gonna wait about another week and a half before I start to thin them out to being about 1 to 2 inches apart from each other. So one of the things with gardening is I don't like to pull out anything that's thriving or still living, even though this is an eggplant from last summer. I like to keep things in the ground that are doing well, like this eggplant is. It's got some flowers on it. It's got new growth in the center of it. It could use a little deadheading here. So deadheading is just, like it sounds, cutting off anything that's dead. Because what's happening is your plant is putting some energy still into these extra limbs. And we really just want it to put energy into the new growth that you see here. Moving back here to this raised bed, some of my Asian greens here. So I have pak choi, and then this purple bok choy. I have a medley of radishes that I just kind of sprinkled in between these Asian greens that are starting to sprout up. Those should be ready to harvest in the next month or so. I've got some borage and cilantro popping up on its own. So as things pop up in the garden, I just let it do its thing, especially when it's kind of like things that I want. So I would definitely want some cilantro, some borage. Then I've got my Romanesco. It's got these geodesic kind of patterns on it. Again, it doesn't look like much is going on, but I've got some sprouting broccoli here, broccolini, Swiss chard, and then somehow my San Marzano tomatoes from this summer are still going pretty strong. You could see there's some tomatoes still on here. So this is Dyer's chamomile, and it makes a really beautiful natural yellow dye pigment for fabrics. We've got one of my helpers here, Miss Lottie. Lottie girl. What do you hear? She is the best garden helper there ever was. This is Lottie. She is about, how old are you? You're 4.5. She's the sweetest soul. This is one of my 2 dogs. She loves being outside, loves to sunbathe, and she asked if she could come along for the tour with us. But you have to stay away from the chickens. In this raised bed, it's actually doing really well compared to some of the other ones. In the front of the raised bed, I have calendula growing here, which is actually kind of a medicinal herb that people use to make healing salves and things like that. We've also got Swiss chard here. And then on this side, I have my Savoy cabbages, which are just now starting to head, which means that they're starting to finally form their bulb. Over here, I have a ton of different kale. So I've got purple kale, Russian kale, lacinato kale, also known as Tuscan kale. We've also just got regular old curly leaf kale. In this next raised bed, I first off have some purple mustard greens here that are doing really well. They're just loose leaf, so I kind of just pick the amount that I need for a recipe. Kind of nestled in here, I've got some more cilantro that's doing really well. Some overwintered jalapeno peppers. This is oregano that I recently cut back pretty dramatically, but oregano is a perennial herb and it will come back with a vengeance. We've also got some thyme in here too. I've got a bunch of purple sprouting broccoli seedlings here, and then a few that are a little bit more mature. So kind of I succession planted some of these here. It doesn't produce one head of broccoli. Instead, it produces many, many shoots of broccoli, which is really good for prolonging your harvesting seasons. You can see here I have some fairy tale eggplants. So these are miniature eggplants. They taste just as good as the real thing. They're just a little bit more of a bite-size portion. And then in this next raised bed, in the front section, we've got green onions, a little bit of chives, and then I've also got one of my favorite vegetables to grow, which is celeriac or celery root. It's kind of like a parsnip. You can puree it, you can eat it raw. It's really, really nutritious. It's the bulb part of celery. It's cultivated specifically for the root. One of my claims to fame are artichokes, and we're just now approaching artichoke season, and just in a matter of weeks, you'll start seeing the artichokes popping up all throughout these plants right here. And we'll probably harvest at least like a dozen per each plant. So I've got 3 plants here. That's bordered by some sage, kind of coming back now that it's spring, but it kind of died back in the fall and winter. And then my other garden helper is here. This is Pippa. She's got a lot of spunk, a lot of fight. You want to help me in the garden today? Now moving on to this raised bed, it needs a little bit of work. It's getting a little bit spent. This is where I had a lot of my Chinese long beans. I need to take this out and then clean this up. But as you can see, I still have eggplants going here. Quite a few hot peppers that are doing really well. I've got some celery down in the back half of this. So in the front of this raised bed, I've got some more eggplant. This is an Italian variety called Listata de Gandia. And then the rest of this raised bed contains garlic. I plant a soft neck variety of garlic because I'm in a mild climate. So I planted this at the beginning of October, I believe. So although it might not look like they're super vigorously green with growth, as soon as we hit spring And hopefully we get some more rain here. We have not received any rain here in Los Angeles all winter long. So I'm supplementing a lot with extra nutrients. I added some compost recently to this raised bed. And then in the final raised bed here, this is kind of like a perennial raised bed, set it and forget it. It'll be really remarkable for you to see how this transitions even over the course of the next 3 months. I've got a ton of artichokes in here that are gonna spring to life. We've got a ton of new green growth. I've also got fennel in here, so bulbing fennel. We've also got asparagus. So asparagus is pretty unique. It stays dormant most of the year, and then in springtime, it just shoots up out of the raised bed, kind of out of nowhere. Planting together the artichoke, asparagus, and fennel really worked out to create a nice little ecosystem here. So my vegetable garden is surrounded by a diverse selection of fruit trees that I planted over 4 years ago now. So the very first one here is in ground, and it's a Eureka lemon tree. Eureka lemons are big. They've got a huge pith and peel. They're extremely fragrant. Flanking all of these fruit trees is blue flowering rosemary. And not only is it fragrant, you can use rosemary in recipes, but as you'll see, there are tons and tons of bees on this rosemary, which is really, really important, not only for my vegetables and things here, but especially for the fruit that I have growing. So moving along, I've got my Haas avocado tree, which we harvested a bunch of avocados off of. And then we've got the Fuerte avocado tree, which is just now starting to blossom. In order to ensure a really successful harvest of avocados, or even most fruit, you need to make sure you're getting good pollination. While I have some success stories, this is a green gage plum, and you might be thinking it looks like this because it's winter time. It kind of looks like this most of the year. A few leaves might sprout out, but it hasn't gotten as big as the rest of the fruit trees, as you can see. I also like to grow wildflowers down the center, so I'll sprinkle just a wildflower mix that sometimes comes back year after year. And then on the other side, I also have lavender, which also helps with attracting a ton of bees. And then we've got another runway of fruit trees on this side, starting off with an Anna apple, which is a specific variety that's really good for zones that don't get frost like I am here in Southern California. This is my wonderful pomegranate, which I harvested my first pomegranates from this in November, and it's done super, super well. I know being in winter it doesn't look like much, but if you are planting fruit trees right now, your fruit trees will look like sticks. And then this here is a black turkey fig tree. It's losing the very last of its leaves, but you can see that there's some figs that are still hanging on. They're not quite yet ripe. They should be turning fully black before they're ready to harvest. Not only are figs edible, but the leaves make for a lot of really great uses as well. You can make a fig leaf oil. You can also use fig leaves to steam things in. I'm keeping my fig tree kind of like a bowl, upward, symmetrical, keeping my pomegranate low, bush-like. And then, I don't know if there's any taming this one. This is my Pakistan mulberry tree. Believe it or not, this started as the same size as this green gage plum 4 years ago. They were planted at the same exact time, and you can just see certain things do better than others, and I cannot keep up with the growth of this tree. So you can see this branch is overlapping this branch, so I'll have to prune one of these off. If you watched last episode, you know that I have not harvested a single mulberry off of this tree. And then this is one of my favorite ways to decoratively cover maybe a wall, but also not fully obscure it. So this is creeping fig. It slowly starts to, as the name suggests, creep along the wall. But I like it because it doesn't fully obstruct the wall. It's got some nice little reveals, and it looks really nice, especially when the sun is shimmering on it. Behind all of these fruit trees, I have lemongrass growing, which helps to deter pests and insects, especially mosquitoes. And then this is my very last fruit tree. This is called a Santa Rosa plum. This is a weeping Santa Rosa plum. So its habit of growth is these branches actually droop down and it creates this really beautiful cascade of green and flowers and Santa Rosa plums. It's relatively compact, super easy to prune. You just kind of prune anything that starts to shoot upwards to encourage that drooping, weeping habit. I've gotten crops of plums off of this tree already. Same thing goes with the avocados. Even if you only have one Haas avocado tree and you live in an area where a lot of people are growing avocado trees, like Los Angeles or Southern California or some other sort of warm climate, as long as the bees are migrating around, you'll probably get pretty good pollination.